All right, Steve, thanks for coming onto the podcast. Really appreciate it. You're here. We're here finally. This is the second time we're speaking this week. And so welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Do you want to give us a bit about yourself, who you are, what you do, and how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Alex. Delighted to be on your show. So many people have talked about it. And so
that's not true.
But I really, my journey that led to here today started back at Walt Disney World, actually, where I started my career. And it kind of shaped the early lives for me. And then I had an opportunity from Disney World. Actually, I was a Jungle Cruise operator and monorail, which I thought, okay, I have now hit the pinnacle of being at Walt Disney World. Yes. And so you're like, I drive the monorail. And so, so I had the opportunity to work at Darden. I actually interviewed at Olive Garden and got hired, and then said I didn't want to move to Iowa. From there, they said, well, go to work at Red Lobster. And I had an opportunity to start at Red Lobster on International Drive, which is a very busy location. And that was the start of my career there. And it was, coming from Walt Disney World, there was a lot of expectations of me to be in the dining room and entertain and do all that stuff for the guest. And I had the opportunity to meet Bill Darden. My first week I'm in training, my general manager says, hey, there's this couple coming up in the Cadillac. Can you seat them in the booth over there? And I go, okay, sure. So they come in, I open the door, welcome them in, get my menus, go take them all the way to the back table. And he sits down with his wife and he goes, you don't know who I am, do you? I go, no, I just got told to seat you. I assume you're somebody important, and he goes, I'm Bill Darden. And he then said, sit right here next to me. And I'm sitting next to him. I'm like third week in training. And he tells me all about taking good care of employees. And really it's about the culture. And it's always about your employees are always going to give better experiences to our guests if you do that. And, reading the plaque on the corporate support center and then hearing it from Bill Darden, there's two different things, right? And from that moment, Red Lobster and Darden really had me. I'm like going, I can't believe, I'm third week and many people will never meet him. And I had the opportunity. So I came out of training, and I tell you this story because it really shaped, and I'll kind of bring it all together as I get to my first restaurant, which they put me at the corporate office cafeteria right in front of the support center. And again, coming from Disney World, they're like, oh, no, you got to work the dining room and everything else. I go, okay. And then Joe Lee walks in, which was our CEO at the time. And I'm working the front of the house and talking to all the guests and everything else. And he goes, Steve, I'm Joe Lee. I go, yeah, I knew that. Yeah. I checked your food and server and everything else while you were sitting here. And he started laughing. He goes, hey, why don't you go this is old time now, go to the comment card box and pull the comment cards. And let's sit over here and see what people thought about you today. and I'm like going, okay, first Bill Darden and now Joe Lee. I'm like looking ready for the cameras at this point almost. Am I in a training video or something? And I grab the comment card, sit down, and he just talks to me. And he's like going, okay, what would you do different? And he says, all these things are opportunities to do a better job. And it wasn't like it was bad things or anything else. It was just, he was teaching me that find the problems and be excited about solving them. Yeah. And don't get discouraged. And then to the point he goes, okay, let's go to the restrooms and check them. Because I think someone said our mirror was dirty. And he goes in there and he's washing his hands, says, watch this trick. And he takes the water and throws it up on the mirror, takes a bunch of paper towels, says, see, you can clean these mirrors anytime you ever wanted to. And from that moment, meeting Bill Darden, the founder of Red Lobster, and then Joe Lee, the CEO, and he always told me, he said, look, it doesn't matter your title with this company. At the end of the day, employees are important, the guests are important, and never lose sight of that. And you're never too important to clean a mirror in a bathroom. I just showed you that. And so I think that, coming from Walt Disney World, that's all about magic and taking care of people. And then having this like first year in a new job where the foundation is the CEO and the founder telling you, this is the way you should lead. really kind of shaped my career from that moment forward, because I'm like, okay, I just heard it from the two most important people in the company.
Yeah.
And, having the opportunity to have that early on kind of shaped my time at Darden, really around the guest service and being of service and understanding how to really create that culture with the employees, or crew members or team members, whatever the company calls them, right? It just becomes, it's important to understand their perspective as they're telling you something and not shortchange their issues. And so that was a very big a learning point for me that I kept my whole entire career. And then from that, I ended up starting out as a restaurant manager and worked my way up to senior vice president, ran 2 divisions at the end. And then had the opportunity, I didn't know they were selling Red Lobster at the time, but had the opportunity to become vice president COO at Smashburger. And so at that time, fast casual was the newest thing and cutting edge. And, it was exciting. And so I took the opportunity, had a great time learning from the leaders. And it was a totally different experience, right? Here's a bunch of entrepreneurs that's growing a company that's fast moving. It's not the Darden world. Everything's got systems. Systems aren't even made yet. And you're moving at a fixed place, and you have franchisees. And so it was another great opportunity that I get told, hey, go pick up the prince from Saudi Arabia. We had restaurants there at the airport. And I'm like going, okay, it's like, again, I've only been there like a month. And so I'm picking him up at the airport, taking him to the conference, and he's in my car and I'm talking to him the whole way. And, we become really good friends, and it wasn't like a Saudi prince, but he was a prince. And it wasn't like I had security guards or anything. It wasn't like that. But it was, again, it was a shaping moment for me, because then no one asked me, are you okay to do this? Or, they just gave it to me. And so from that, I started realizing everyone's the same, no matter where you're from. He was looking to have somebody he could understand the business and help them. And we became really good friends and hung out the whole entire conference. And I'm like, now I'm got like 4 franchisees around me. I've never done this before. And I started understanding that, operations, no matter where you are, I spent 23 years at Red Lobster. And so it was like, I knew the Darden systems down pat, but, here it's now, okay, there's a lot more things to, it's okay if it's not perfect right away. You just get it. You got to get it fixed as you go, and you got to constantly improve. And so really enjoyed that. And then I had the opportunity to work at Tom's, which is another concept there. I was the only one that knew casual dining. And so they put me over there, and then an opportunity to design and help build the first one at outside of Denver. And first one was Bleeding Money, so we fixed that. But then the next one was at the Staples Center. Now they call it whatever currency. But we built one that had our 3 concepts in
crypto.
it.
That was it.
Crypto, yes. And so here I am now designing a restaurant, and the owner, super great guy, he flew me to Vegas shows to find the fabric and do all these things. And it's really taught me how to design a building and how to understand how to make it the brand, right? Okay, here's the essence of this brand. Here's what you want to have in it. Here's what people should see. And so between him and Tom, which I always mention, who was an incredible chef, really got me into that entrepreneurial spirit. From there, I get a call about John McGuire from Friendly's wanting to talk to me. We're at the Chicago restaurant show. I'm looking for equipment. And I meet him, and he's going, oh, you got to come help me. We're going to turn over a 100-year iconic brand. And at the time, I had never heard of Friendly's. I'm from the South, right? Orlando. You really don't go to Boston a lot. And so I had the great opportunity. He says, no, you're going to have franchise. You're going to do distribution. I'll take the factory, but you got to do all this other stuff. And we're going to do it together. And so we really partnered. From that experience, you learn the franchise side even more. We had 30 franchisees that were disgruntled at the time. We had just gone out of bankruptcy. We were called the dirtiest restaurant in America, and on Today's Show or something. And then I'm like going, okay, well, I haven't been through this yet. This should be fun. Again, it got back to that root thing about when you come into a concept that's really old, you have people that maybe have lost the excitement, The company had been through a lot. And so you got to bring energy. And I think that's something too, that I think a lot of people forget, that being in operations, your main job is to bring the energy to the company and to really put the life into it. And that's through interactions. And it's also through how you lead, and it's how you get excited about things, and how you're transparent and be able to be honest about things to build the trust. And so from that, we were able to turn it around. I'm sorry if this is going too long.
No,
I'm going to share these stories.
This is what it's about.
It kind of makes it all back up again, but it's where at that time, franchisees were outperforming the company. I had to spend time. Some of them didn't want to meet me. They said, wait till you're here a year because nobody else has made it that long. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, I'm still going to go to your restaurants and meet your people, but maybe I'll see you next time I visit. And so, but coming from a Darden and then from this entrepreneurial company where everybody was excited to a company that people were discouraged and they weren't as happy, and we were brought in to really change it, was a whole different part of my career. And from that, it was just like excitement of, wow, this is not so hard. You really just got to get people behind you. I found the best performers. We were able to promote them. We removed a lot of people that just shouldn't have been working for us anymore. After we spent time with them, right? Made sure that we gave them all the tools they needed. But at some point we got to walk away. We remodeled the restaurants, maybe my 6 months in, again, remember the story of this being the dirtiest company. And John goes, hey, let's do if it's not right, it's on us. And I'm like, going, okay, like if they have no bad experience, we're just going to pay for their meal. Oh, okay. How many months? You got 2 months to get ready for this. Okay. Fine. But it came off with perfect. We were a great combination, and really were able to make a difference. And having distribution, and we had 25 trucks at the time, and I'm in charge of delivering and backhauling, and it really, and talking to truck drivers was no different. I started realizing, everybody makes things. Well, how are you going to talk to those people? You've never done this before. I said, we really don't need to do it. You have to respect the people that do their jobs. Totally. And you have to be able to find common ground and understand what their needs are, fulfill them, and they're going to be listening to you and work together. I mean, usually the people that have been doing a job for a long time really know how to do the job. It's just things have gotten in the way, or they've lost their way. And so from that, we were able to fix that. And I had the opportunity to become a CEO at Outback, largest franchise on the West Coast. And so going from Boston all the way to San Diego. And so, it's like, okay.
Lovely.
And to me, it was, San Diego was great, but it was also, I never worked California before. And, at that time, our, wage was going up $1 every year, which was $2 million to bottom line earnings of the 56 restaurants we started with. And you're walking into, again, a franchise that had very little control for so long. The owner lived in Tampa. Great guy, super good at culture, built a great inner city, but none of the people really ever had visitors. Nobody went to the restaurants. And so now I'm their boss for the first time in 20 years. And, all of a sudden there's people visiting and saying, hey, we probably got to fix this. And you're selling something. A lot of times people don't fix things, which is typical. And so you're repairing, and then the restaurants were aging in California. We were getting kicked out of some of our best restaurants because we hadn't remodeled it yet. And so it was a speed of really getting the things in place the first year, and had a great opportunity learning from the JVPs and the partners in the restaurants about, now you got each general manager that's a franchise owner, each JVP that has a part of the business. And now you're basically working with them to make more money. Yeah. And so a totally different, unique situation that really builds ownership. Yes. Yeah. And so it was bringing them all together to have one way. Yeah. And that was the hardest part, because everybody was doing their own thing. And it was, it was successful, but at times we were starting to fall behind of our competition. Texas Roadhouse was coming. And so I was trying to say, okay, let's just find who does it really great and just do the same thing. Yeah. And so we were able to do a lot of those things by working together, and really, again, securing a culture that was basis of celebrating people's success, having transparency, and working together to solve the problems. Yeah. And from that, we were able to then grow and purchase 50 more restaurants from Outback. So we had from Vegas all the way over. which again, now you're taking franchise people and company people and putting them together in one company. And so here's the first group that does it this way and always done it this way. And then the next group's a little bit more entrepreneurial and they do it their way. And so it was bringing them all together and saying, okay, we got one company now, and we're going to work together to make Outback the same as Outback anywhere. And so we got to kind of do things together so that the guests have the same experience and same high quality food, which they're all great at. It was just the mindset of changing it and saying, okay, now we lead a little bit different because we're franchised and we have to pay on your sales. And so that's different for company people sometimes going, what do you mean? Well, that first 10% is gone. And then we got to work from there. And so that changes how we operate. And so it was an incredible experience. Had a fun time working for a private equity again, first with Sun Capital, then HIG. And between the two, learned a lot about private equity, a lot about how to really understand how to get the most out of a business and keep it and do it right. And had the fortunate opportunity to be able to do that. And then, from being a franchise and working with the great people at Outback, I had an opportunity to have my own company in North Carolina and run a company separate from that. And so I took that opportunity at Wild Wing Cafe, which had live music and stages. Again, haven't done that yet. But it was more of a distressed company right before the pandemic. They had struggled for many years. Some of it was maybe the wrong people, and some of it was the buildings were old and 1,300 square feet restaurants or with the bars, 3 bars. There's a lot of opportunity that costs a lot of money to keep up. And so we were able to remodel all of them, get them. We haven't remodeled them in 20 years. Get a prototype going, be able to flip restaurants that were closing for like $500,000. I was able to turn around a restaurant and reopen one instead of spending $3.5 million. And again, that culture. So here's a company again, lots of fun. You got live music. Darius Rucker signed his contract in a Wild Wing Cafe.
Mr. Wagon Wheels.
Yeah, Luke Combs used to play for us in Asheville before he became famous.
I know who Luke Combs is.
There. Yeah, so we had a lot of high publicity. Because we had the most stages in the Southeast. So we were able to really build a great relationship and had a great concept. But unfortunately, through that pandemic, and as you remember, the chicken prices went through the roof for wings. And so you're a wing place trying not to sell wings and trying to maneuver out of the pandemic where you're repaying all your rent and doing all the different things that we had to do. It was tough and we weren't able to make it out as clean as we wanted. And so then I had this great opportunity for here at Goodberry's, 35-year company that is like I would say it's a hidden gem that everybody in Raleigh knows about. We have lines around the building to have our product. It is probably the most fantastic custard you'd ever have in your life. And even if you like ice cream, this is much better. We make our own mix. We have our own creamery. And so it kind of gets back to the Friendlies. But at the same time, it's all wholesome, no additives. And it's the first time I've worked with a concept that no one knew about. As you can imagine, you heard all the stories, and it's a first concept that didn't have all the problems. It was the first GM still worked for us, and still does.
It's actually amazing, by the way.
35 years later, and it's from the founders and our CEO today. It's incredible. They built a great culture, and now it's the point that we now are going to grow. And so that's what this all was about, coming here and help grow this company through making sure we keep the incredible culture that was cultivated for 35 years, but be able to add things as we grow now that make sense. Now you're going to start developing people to be maybe a multi-unit one day where they were just GMs forever. There was no growth. And so we're open our first restaurant in 20 years this year. And then we're starting a franchise. Wow, I got you all the way up to the right.
Do we want to know what time it's the podcast we're in right now? I was like, you're on such a roll that it was cogent step by step into the next one. And I feel like to your point earlier, it's like the layered experience like every individual role, like meeting and working with private equity, doing like a turnaround, like every bit of your career has kind of layered up to where you are today. And like, I mean, it goes without saying that, like, I can obviously tell that, like, you're a phenomenally gifted operator, and we can laugh and be humble about it, but I mean, objectively, you are. And so I'm curious as well, like, how the Goodberries kind of came around in the first place, because you're not native to North Carolina, not native, like you're a plant, like as in you're not, you're not from North Carolina. And you weren't living there. And so the opportunity to like, again, would you consider this like a turnaround in one sense, because you're evolving the brand in the sense that, like, they haven't opened a store in 20 years. So like, was that like the kind of reason why they reached out to you, or like, how did that happen?
No, it was my experience.
Yeah.
And really in this opportunity, it's about building it right. And, for me, I was excited about it because I didn't have to fix anything that was broken.
Yeah.
It wasn't that, it wasn't like, okay, they're moving so fast. So it's like Smashburger, where we don't have all the systems in place. I can actually get them all in place before we grow. And it was almost like a clean piece of paper for the first time to say, okay, if you did it right, what would you do differently than everything I've had in all this history? And how would you make sure you maneuver away from any of these pitfalls that you had to fix? Either it was a franchise that was 56 that didn't have all the infrastructure in place. And, all the companies that you go over, and I'm sure anybody on this table would always tell you when you get to a new company, there's pieces of the puzzle that weren't maybe put together all the right way in the beginning. Yeah. And you're still trying to fix it 15, 20 years later. And, it's even, payroll systems don't talk, the back office systems aren't exactly right. You haven't really fixed all these things because you either were moving too fast or leadership changed and had different direction, that it was a chance really to do it right from the very beginning. And, even that first franchisee, we have one now in Australia. We've had one for 10 years, but it'll be our first like local franchisee, and really be able to really get it started right. And this is such a gold mine of just an incredible product and incredible service that, is like one of those once in a lifetime opporunities.
Totally.
You always talk to people that came in like afterwards, like Shake Shack when it first started. Oh, that's when you should have been there. Or like right when I got to Red Lobster, they stopped building. Oh yeah, we were building like crazy. Oh, now we're stopped.
Of course, it's almost like after fact.
Yeah, Outback.
If only we knew. Exactly.
Yes. We built out already. Now we're trying to have another concept.
And it's interesting.
I always end up in the maturity part, so I was excited to be in something at the infancy of starting it.
Well, you don't want to get into the saturation part, if that's the reference to the maturity part that you're saying. Sorry, I'm going back to my business school. What was it again? What was it again? I can't even remember what the framework was at this stage, but I remember there was maturity and saturation, and that was like that phase. But it's interesting, to me when like, you talk like so much about culture and how the kind of like you have your brass tacks and you have like your table stakes kind of things that you need to do. Like, so like you're obviously looking at these operations from an operational standpoint. It's like, how do we nail the processes? Like, what's the tech debt? What's the technical opportunities we have to improve? But then you look at something like culture, and culture, like, we kind of talked a lot about this, like on our preliminary call, like it's very like hard to describe, but when you see it, and it's like, you're going into like, one of the many in your background there. I mean, you've got Friendlies, for example. It's like, you can quickly observe like the stores, the cleanliness challenge that you had there, you can see these things. When you look at something like culture, when you come into an org, like, how do you think about that and building, say, Goodberries and the culture that exists already, and thinking about that for like the scaling opportunity that you now have? Because, that's obviously the roadmap here, is to take it to the next level. So like when you look at something like culture, how do you think about maintaining it and evolving it?
Well, I think what a lot of leaders maybe don't do is really look at that exists, because sometimes you don't have the time, right? Sometimes everything's on fire and you're just trying to put out fires and get it calmed down as fast as you can. And I think it puts you at a disadvantage because you have to make decisions faster when you have a company that's really in a good position, cash wise, everything, and there is no issues, right? And it's just wants growth. You have the time really to meet with the existing team and understand why they love it. What is that culture? Because again, you're in a small business. It's not written. There's no mission statement somewhere. There's no values somewhere. It was the values of the founder and the family that built it, right?
Yeah.
And to the point, it's almost like tribal knowledge. Oh, we did this, and I really thought that was great. Okay, now how do you build a system that generates that? How do you build training that cultivates that when everyone just does what they do and they don't really know how they do it?
Yeah.
And it's like working with people, listening to the stories, and then saying, okay, I understand that. So this is what we could do. Okay, this is how we should train, and these are the people that should train this stuff. And then they might not even know how to train yet, right? Because they've just people have been put with them and they work with a shift with them, and then they learn, and it maybe take them a month. And so that to me is like really listening to the existing team and listening to everyone, so you have all the different perspectives. Great to have the first GM, because I hear about the first restaurant opening and the founders working with him and hiring him and the things that he did and how he did them. And he's been like my ambassador now, going around and telling those stories so we don't lose it. It was kind of like, for me, I got to meet Bill Darden. I got to meet Joe Lee. And so through my career at Red Lobster, I told those stories. The actual founder of the franchise in West Coast built the first Outbacks in California. He told a lot of great stories. Those people were around during that time. And so they give you the rich history of a company. The founders were still alive at Friendly's. I mean, they were 99 and 100. And so you got all the stories. And I think what sometimes is missing is people come in as a CEO or president or COO, whatever it is, and they want to change it to what they think it should be, instead of understanding the brand through the eyes of the teammates and the employees, and understanding, okay, here's how they see it, here's how the consumer sees it. Okay, now how do we find out what's broken, and how do we evolve it into what society is today? Because sometimes that's an issue. You've never moved it, and people still just think you're the grandma and grandpa place to go, and you're not getting the younger team, or vice versa. However that is, to build and not alienate anybody, is really just about, again, getting back to culture and listening to people, and spending time where you're not talking and they are, and doing roundtables, and just, trying to understand all these different perspectives, instead of just listening to whoever your boss is or somebody saying, do it this way.
Yeah.
And you're like going, okay, I do, but we got to think about these things.
And so it's interesting, and I love how, straightforward you are about culture. Like it also isn't complicated, because I feel like when I talk to, I've done like 90 something podcasts now, so it's a lot, and I've heard a lot about culture. And one thing I think about is like the successful people in this space all define culture relatively similarly, but have like a flavor of their own to it. But it's kind of all speaking to the same thing, which is like almost like respect for your employees and respect for the staff, and like empowering the staff to do like more, but in an encouraging kind of way. I feel like on a bare bones, I hear like a lot of that. And then you're saying there, like, sometimes there's fires, and you just have to put the fires out before you can even you got to hit the brake, and like before you can even tackle that. I guess like from your position as like such a senior executive, like when you're like coming in and looking at, like, say, because you've been through a number of these brands in various leadership roles, is it like more often than not like the process coming first, like, or like, like knowing, say, like the stores need to be retroed or refurbed, or is it like straight into the culture? Like when you look at these sort of problems, like do you like have like a hierarchy? Or are you trying to figure out all three at the same time? Or like, I'm just curious, like when you talk about, say Outback, for example, and you were like, a lot of the stores like had no customers, a lot of the stores like needed to be like actually like retroed, and they were kind of kicked out of their buildings. And there's obviously people who work there as well. And presumably there were people that are kind of like lifers to the brand, or people that have been there a long time. There's a lot to juggle in that sort of like 2-3 year kind of like operation,
Yeah, I think Well, I always say, because I remember being a GM and I remember having the new presidents come in, and it used to be the joke, oh, I guess we'll have a new prototype and we'll see what they want us to look like now and wonder where we're going to be coming from, because it's always new marketing people. Then, anytime there's a transition in leadership, you get a new prototype, you get new marketing, and then you get some different food. And when you've been in a brand for 20 some years, you're like, going, okay, here comes a new president. I wonder and I used to open all the prototypes. So I wonder what the new building's going to open it look like now. Coastal home to all the different designs that Red Lobster had over the years, until I ended up with, and I'll share this story with you because I think this is where you're coming from. Kim Lottrop came in to Red Lobster, and we had been in some downward years, and Kelly Baltus, and they came in with this, like Kelly had all this energy, straightforward, basically saying, look, we're not good. We just got to get better. And it was like very to the point, but fun, and made like cleaning restrooms exciting. Hey, look, we have dirty restrooms on our complaints. Let's just clean them, and it was the first time I started seeing, okay, it wasn't like you were saying, it wasn't a political speech that I was kind of lost as an operator. Because, when you're a general manager, you're lucky if you're really listening to half the people, because someone's talking or anything else at 700 some people in a conference, let alone they're even in the room. And I remember Kelly always counted everyone and said, we know how many GMs are here. Make sure we don't have one extra chair. So I can see an empty chair. And so it was kind of like a great joke. But, in Outback, that's a perfect example. So I knew they loved the owner. They just got sold. Here's a new company. They're scared, right? Everyone's always scared of the new leadership change. Are they going to fire us? What's going to happen? I've been here for so long, and, I'm just going to keep my head down. I remember hearing all those things, and I'm like, oh, well, you really should just want to be number one. Yeah. No one's going to fire the best. So to me, it's almost like, I think it was a Steve Martin thing. How do you become a really great actor? It's being better and being so good that they can't overlook you. Yeah. And so that's always been my thought process. But I always look for those diamonds in the rough, the people that maybe no one has spent time with, that I can cultivate, and that can be your first follower. Right. And so you need some of those people to be behind you, and you got to start sharing a vision right out of the gate. I mean, you can't wait 2 weeks to talk to everyone. For me, it's always, let's get on the phone as soon as possible. Let me just tell them I'm going to come talk to them all, and I'm going to listen to them and make them feel more comfortable about the situation. Then maybe in a year I might end up in their area to talk to them, right? And all they're going to see is memos or emails. And I think that's where leaders, basically, no matter how big your company is, people need to hear from you, because you're hoping that the director or the general manager that listened to you is going to actually tell their employees. I mean, the odds are very high. I remember this goes all the way back when I was in the first restaurant at Red Lobster. I listened to our president talk, because they had their meetings in the dining room. So I'd sit out there with my little coffee cups. I put them all like a little RL, and I'd be pouring their coffee, all the executives, and I'm listening to the whole meeting. And then, it comes back later on. I hear what he said, and then I see what we're doing, and I'm like, oh, well, that's not at all what he said. Yeah. And that's when I started realizing, wow, what a disconnect. And I would never have noticed that as a restaurant manager if I wasn't in that meeting that I probably should have never been listening to. Yeah. And I'm like,
you got to ask for permission later, And
I remember him saying, what'd you think? I said, well, no offense, but you realize what you said and what we got are two different things. And you might have changed it, but I mean, I heard what you wanted, and it seems like that's not where we're going. And it was like a moment for him to go, oh, wow. I guess that perspective. And that made me think, from the time you think it's a great in a boardroom to the time it actually gets to the frontline employee could be totally different. And unless you do something to follow up, you have no idea why it didn't work. They're just going to tell you that maybe your plan wasn't as good as it should have been. Right. Or,
I mean, I think that's the nature of corporate America on a very high level anyway. I mean, I've been in those situations, designing concepts for banks and pharma companies, and these amazing, miraculous things. And they pay millions of dollars to have these engagements, and they don't even see the light of day. They're just like, here's the deck, and goes in a folder, and it goes to somebody's drawer. And you're like, well, what was the point of all that? You know what I mean? In my head, I think about that a lot when I think about the waste. And I think it's part of, you know what it is? I think it's like when you work in you try to create a culture of like, I don't want to say innovation, but a culture of like speed to execute, and I think smaller, like say for you, like say at Goodberry, for example, it's not like you're small by any means, but it's like you're a dynamic in terms of like, okay, we can do the roadmap and we can go make this happen. And I guess that's like the attraction for me with something like a startup as well, where it's like, you just do it. You know what I mean? Like you just have to like like one is better than zero. It doesn't even like matter. Like I think of this podcast, for example, okay, as 0 to 1. Like a 1 to 10 will be like, I'll rent a studio and we'll have like proper lighting and all these things. But I'm like, deep down, I'm not sure if you've ever heard of Mr. Beast, who's like, yeah, of course. And he had his burger thing that he did this year as well. And he was like, nobody really cares about the video. He's like, people will listen on YouTube. They won't like watch. And so like, all I really care about is like making sure the audio and the guest have something interesting to say. Do you know what I mean? And like, it'll distribute itself if it's clever. And then you can invest so much more. But I'm just like, make it happen. Because when we actually did our OKRs for this entire thing, I was like, I'll do 20 for H2, 20 podcasts. And I was like, I've never even done one in my life. And I was like, I didn't even know. And I was like, I guess I'll just email some of our clients and invite them on and see what happens. Like, I don't even know what we'll even talk about. I didn't even know. And now I guess it's like, it's just like a question of like making it happen. And I think like to that exact point, like listening and like seeing the disconnect between like, what's said, what's planned, what's expected versus like how it's actually delivered. I think, there's that chain of responsibility almost, and like, it's almost like telephone. You know what I mean? How it gets kind of diluted as it kind of goes around. So it's kind of like a bastardized version of kind of what you want. And I think that's like, I think it's symptomatic, I think, of kind of like large organizations, kind of, more traditional kind of hierarchies. I mean, there's probably any number of ways to like diagnose what that is, but it's fascinating you say that, and fascinating that even at your younger age, that like, or kind of like when you were kind of like more kind of coming up in your career, that you were able to spot that. And then also have the confidence. So like that kind of leads me to a question I want to ask you about, which is like, isolating great talent within this space, like, or identifying kind of talent, because quite clearly you were like identified early, like, I mean, I feel like I'm really bigging you up here, you know what I mean? Like, but I mean, like, I am, you're on a podcast, so of course you'd be bigged up, but I mean, in the sense that like, like, when you're looking for people to like come into your restaurant jobs, and I'm not just talking about hourlies, like, like the managers, the operators in the organization, presumably you like to see a lot of yourself in the people. Like, how do you identify what makes somebody good from great?
It's interesting because I would tell you, it's one of the missing links in most companies that they don't realize that hiring is the brand, and they don't invest a lot of time and energy on either the systems they use or the companies that they work with to make sure they do it. And you leave it up to the people to find these, and they're just going to hire whoever they are. Right. Yeah. And so if you have the wrong person, they're just going to hire the wrong person. And so that's where keeping people that I've seen it in many different ways, and I'll share it this way. Yeah. I've seen people that you keep too long and they hire only bad people, making a really bad restaurant that you're going to have to turn around one day. Did it as a GM. I'd walk into restaurants going, who hired all these people? And then I realized you saw the person that maybe left and you're like, going, okay, not that this person was a bad person. They just shouldn't have been hiring. But then you can't say, which I've seen, we don't let the general manager hire here because they're not good at it. So we have this other person hire. I said, well, then how is that a good culture? You don't want to talk to our general manager because he's really not nice. And so, you're going to just talk to me. And that doesn't say good things about the company as well. So I think hiring that right individual and really teaching people, and that I think that's a part that it's about the company that gives you the talent, right? Brings it to your doorstep. It's your job then to make sure that you can have really great people that a company gives you, but you have terrible culture, so you lose them. And then you blame the company and not your culture because it's easier. Oh, it's that company we picked. They can't find somebody. I can't find anybody on LinkedIn, or I can't find anybody on whatever company they use. And that's just a start of the whole process. It has to be a combination that you work together with the company to cultivate and understand, okay, why did we lose these people? Well, it's our culture, or maybe we had to twist the survey questions, or like what we're going to do here is come up with a value questionnaire to make sure that we're getting the right people in the door, and the managers aren't hiring whoever walks in. But after that, it gets to the point of giving them a future. And, I share the story about being a restaurant manager, being a monorail driver, and started out my career, which I didn't say, about wanting to be a stand-up comedian and doing those kind of things, which kind of says a little bit about my personality. But what it did teach me about when you want to be a stand-up is really watching the audience. And it taught me emotional intelligence in a way that you had to read people at an early age. And then you had to shift gears very quickly, doing improv, and understanding that somebody gives you something. You got 2 seconds to come up with the answer, which is kind of like guest service and taking care of guests. And when I started turning around guests, I'm like, oh, this is great. But there's a lot of that you have to teach. People aren't born with it. And I learned it from trying to do stand-up. But it wasn't something that I went to a class and someone said, let me teach you about emotional intelligence. Let's talk about it. And so I think in my career, what I've been able to do is every time I've gotten promoted, every time I've left a company, I have developed someone to take my spot. And I've been fortunate to have incredible people work for me that have had the opportunity to take over where I left off and take it to another whole place. But it's great when you can say, okay, through all those different changes, someone that might be still working at that company that actually I was able to give them the opportunity to have this job. And to me, leadership is not about making a lot of money, though that might happen as an end part. It's about really the people. And a lot of people say, well, I make the place better than I found it. I try to always say I make the people smarter and teach them how to take care of themselves when I leave. And so it's always about coaching, developing, and making them do their job, teaching them that you don't have to work 70 hours a week to be successful. In fact, you might not be successful because you won't have a life. And then, and at the end of the day, there's so many people in the restaurant business that work too many hours and have no life. And then they get frustrated. And then they're not a good leader down the road because they gave up all these things in life, or they didn't see their kids graduate, or they didn't tuck them in bed. And there's ways that if they teach everyone that works for them, then everyone's job gets better. And I try to teach them, you teach somebody else to do that. Work on the most important things, and that's cultivating the culture and talking to your guest. Everything else you can teach somebody to do.
You know what's the way you're describing that, what that reminds me. I don't know if you know who the All Blacks are.
No.
The All Blacks are the New Zealand rugby team, and that's like their sort of like nickname. But
yes, I didn't know their name. Yes.
Yeah. Actually, why am I should have said the New Zealand. Why did I expect an American to know their nickname? Well, like a terrible.
Go back and I'll pretend that I did this time.
Yeah, go back.
Of course. Yes. Oh my God, I watch them all the time. Yes.
There's a cultural phenomenon called the All Blacks. They're New Zealand.
Yes, it's the only network I get on cable.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they're on Amazon Prime. There's and fascinating. I mean, they're like the most successful rugby team in history, and their win rate is like 80% over 160 years or something. Like they typically win all the time. And their big thing is like preaching winning with humility. It's like, just because you win doesn't mean you're entitled to be like, an arsehole. And like their number one rule is like no dickheads, which is written on their wall, which I think is kind of funny. But it's interesting you bring this up because it's like, I remember reading about it before. I should probably send you some info, like their leadership kind of thing, and it was like leaders are teachers. Do you know what I mean? It's like one of their things, you know what I mean? It's like, how do you achieve, like improve 100 things by like 1%? It's like, can you do that versus like, or can you find one thing that you can improve like 100%? And it's like isolating those and providing like sort of opportunities for people to like understand like marginal gains. Like you can improve things and kind of move forward and being able to teach people how to do that. I think a lot about like, I think a lot of sort of like leadership stems from an ability to like, not isolate people that you think are poor performers, but encourage them to come along with you on that journey. And I think especially in America, because there's such a kind of overarching sort of like will to win in the sort of the culture that's here, that like people can be left behind very easily. Mm-hmm. And I think it's even more clear in sort of like, non-full-time contracted workers, which would read like hourly in this case, that is like quite possible, And I think like having great leaders, that's why I'm always impressed with great leaders in hospitality that are able to keep staff like through thick and thin if they're good and they want to come in that journey. Like I think a lot about COVID and the staff like had to close down, reopen, and they came back to work. You know what I mean? Like, and like, why are they coming back? Because there's a great culture in place and there's great leadership. Like they're not going back to like crappy restaurants. They're not going back. Like right. they have choice. So like I think a lot about that. It's like if you think about like in a sports analogy, I'm not sure this happens in American sports, but in rugby, you don't get to keep your number. So you're like right. If you're 15, like as in the number doesn't matter, but it's like leave the jersey in a better place than when you got it. And you pass it on. And it's like so.
That's pretty
like,
good.
Yeah, leave it.
I like that. Well, then you'd be either happy or sad, right? You go, no, I got 7. Oh man, I got to do better than the last guy.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you're only as good as your last performance.
Yeah, seven wasn't good last time. I got to change this. No, but I think I'm glad you said this because I thought about this earlier today. That a lot of times leaders get scared of training somebody. And they want to keep it all for themselves. And I remember, and I'm sorry I tell stories, but
I love them.
My first time I was a GM, and I'm doing the schedule, and my assistant general manager's with me, and it's like 7:00. I opened that day, and he was my mid, and it's now 8:00 at night, and I'm still doing the schedules that he was supposed to do, but I wanted to do them to help him, and he goes, "I'm leaving now," and I remember him leaving me, and I'm not done with the schedules yet. I'm going, okay, I get it. Why am I doing somebody else's job?
Yeah.
I'm still here. I'm not at home having dinner with my family, and I'm missing the point about being a leader. A leader's job is you let people do their jobs. You give them the support they need, but then you let them do their jobs. And you don't micromanage them. If you have to micromanage somebody, then you get the wrong person because you lose that spirit. And I think what you said too is about bringing everyone along is around having great systems that everyone becomes equal. And I think it's always that part where when I first became like a senior director, I had a market of we'd say they're decent performers. The division was the worst in Red Lobster. We were there to support and make it better, but I never lost any of my people. I just gave them the great systems and they all rose and became number 1 and broke records. And so it sometimes I think people label performance, but instead of labeling the leader, because the leader will talk bad about their people. And I learned early that when you talk bad about the people, you're really talking bad about yourself. If you're saying you got really bad employees, then you really aren't that good because they really work for you and it's your job to develop them or get rid of them. And so if you kept them, all the performance is really your own fault. And it's easy to blame other people, but at the same time, you got to hold yourself accountable that whatever happens is your fault. And, I always told everybody, look, whether I'm in the restaurant or not in the restaurant, no matter what happens in this company, it's my fault. At the end of the day, I let you work here. I didn't fix something or I didn't do something. And it's not the senior vice president. It's not the director. It's not the general manager. It's not the manager. It's not even the employee's fault. It's my fault for not knowing and not instilling enough that person knew not to do that. Because at the end of the day, in any board meeting, they're not going to say, well, what employee caused this problem? And no CEO is going to say, well, it was Johnny, of course, and we fired him. And so everything's better now.
Totally.
And so I think those are things going from, an employee to CEO of a company. If you don't learn that over those years, and again, I really was fortunate in my career, had a great leaders that I got to learn from, that you understand that doing it right and teaching it, and you're going to make mistakes, but you got to learn from them. And living with passion, though, of making sure people have a work-life balance. And one other thing, I'm sorry, I thought of this today too, and maybe yesterday. I won't say I thought everything today. That sounds a little bad.
You were just waiting.
Yeah, before I did this, I came up with this. But it was, everyone complains about the employees today. And everyone complains that this society now has all these people that can't work. And I remember when I was like, I think 17, before I worked at Walt Disney World, I worked at Wendy's, and I was a restaurant manager. And they sent me to this one restaurant that just could not hire anybody. And I'm like, oh, it's hard to hire anybody. You just got to have fun. It's really not. I have total respect for everyone that ever worked in a Wendy's, right? It's not an easy job, but you got to have fun. It's like the most like painstaking job sometimes. And I was there during where's the beef? So everybody came up to the register, we go, where's the beef? And I go, it's under the pickle. And then they laugh and you're like going, okay, whatever that is. But there's no difference with the employees today than there was 20 years ago, 30 years ago. You just have to understand it's always been around culture. No one ever talked about it in the 80s. No one ever talked about it in the 90s. And it's not a culture that they want everything. It's a culture that you have to be transparent and teach and coach these kids. No different than when I was 18 or 6. Everyone's the same. And society hasn't really changed. It's, again, somebody comes up with an excuse why they can't hire people. And yes, people are now delivering DoorDash and everything else, but restaurants found a way to make money off that. Now you don't have to hire a delivery guy. You got someone that somebody else has hired. And so there's ways around it. And I will tell you, we've lowered our pay. I've worked in every state in this country. Never found any issues hiring people in any of those states if you had the right people leading. And it gets back to what you said originally, is that person that you hire becomes the most important person to fix these problems. And I always just find it very amazing. People say, well, we can't hire anybody. Okay, why are we staffed then? In fact, now you have too many people. It's the opposite problem. And in the middle of the pandemic, I had too many people. They wouldn't quit. And it's because I would talk to them.
Culture.
Right. But then you're like going, okay, I have too many, because you hired more than you needed because you thought they were going to quit. And now I'm like going, okay, now I have to choose in the middle of the pandemic, because I'm talking to everybody every week. I'm explaining things as a CEO. I'm telling them, here's what's going on. Don't be scared. Here's what we know right now. This is the best knowledge we have from the CDC. But I then realized communication with your people is the most important thing. And it can't just be Monday through Friday. Because they don't respect you when it's Monday through Friday. They respect you when you're calling them on a Saturday or Sunday and saying, hey, that was awesome sales last night. I'm really proud of you. Thank you so much for what you did.
Yeah. So how did the pandemic impact your sort of leadership style then? If at all?
I think I don't take for granted that people know everything. I don't take for granted that the managers are able to give the spirit of the message, because I think that's something you learn in years of being a leader, of how to take messages and how do you cultivate them to get people excited about something. Even maybe it's a decision that you have to make as a company, that either it's, hey, you know what, we're going to start doing reviews for the first time, and then, oh, by the way, some of you might not get money because we're actually reviewing you now. And you got to do it in a way that, I'm excited that you all have a chance that we're actually going to be able to tell you the good things that you do. And so just make sure that you're always doing good things, and you're going to have a great review. So it's however you cultivate it. If you're working at a company and they're going to have insurance now is going to take away, the premiums are going up, and you got to manage that better. Then you teach people how not to have that happen to them on that call, instead of always just giving the bad news without, okay, here's how you not have this problem. Okay, we're going to, we have less labor now, but we have a system that's going to help you run the restaurants more efficient. Or we're going to really work around culture and keeping our people. Why we take down labor a little bit, because wage is too high. Everybody just always has a negative, or they just make a statement without giving people hope. And I guess like Reverend Jesse Jackson always said, keep hope alive. And I think those are things that I think leaders forget. And in a challenging world that we live in now, I think that's probably the biggest thing, that as a CEO or wherever you are, a general manager, you could be any position, a restaurant manager with 5 people, listening to what your people are worried about in their lives, paying their bills. And, knowing that, I think at an early time in my career, I realized servers and these people are trusting me to run this restaurant because they have bills to pay and take care of their family. They got to feed their kids. And if I don't run this restaurant great, They don't get any labor. They don't get any hours. They can't make their pay. They can't pay their rent. They can't feed their kids. And at the end of the day, I can't blame marketing. I can't blame the company, because if my numbers aren't, if I'm not number one in the company, then I haven't done a good enough job. If I'm, 600 out of 700 restaurants, I'm not a good leader and I let my people down. And I think those are the conversations that you have to have with people, so they get the reason why they show up for work every day. You show up for your people, not necessarily. You show up for the brand, to grow the brand, to be better, to give your guests this incredible experience. And I'm, to me, that's, I guess, the soapbox I'll stand on.
Well, the last question I always ask people is what advice you would give to anyone listening. And I guess you're going to have to stand on another soapbox.
Let's see. We got like another hour. No, I think here's what I'd always say. You have a life, live your life. If you let your job control your life, you'll look one day and it's like Steve Jobs said, right? You can have all this stuff, but you didn't work with the right people. You didn't take time to listen. You didn't enjoy anything. Yeah. And a company's going to keep moving with or without you. We've seen incredible leaders pass away and the company doesn't even miss a day. They don't shut down for an hour. They don't do anything.
Money never sleeps.
Right. And so you make a difference to the people's lives that you have an opportunity to lead, and you make a difference to teach them that life is short. Enjoy it. This is a job, and you do a job that gives you excitement because you're helping people. Then that's a job that's worth living, but balance it so that you have a life too. I always loved general managers, and I'll leave you with this. General managers that always say, "This is my family." And I go, "You have no other buddy? You don't have a family outside this restaurant?" "Oh, I do, but this is my family." "Okay, so are they not your family?" And what I always try to tell people is, these are your people to lead. That's your family that depends on you. They depend on you, but it's in two different ways. Your time is valuable that they will miss when you're gone. These people will keep living. They'll appreciate your time like a teacher. You remember the teacher, but you didn't keep track with the teacher. And if you instill things in them, they'll be very happy they had an opportunity to have you in their life. Your family will miss you dearly because you are their family, right? And you're all they have. And so I would always just say, balance your life, understand that, and understand companies are companies, and they'll keep moving. And you being part of it is incredible. But at the end of the day, you have to live your life and live with passion every single day and be happy that you wake up, and don't be so depressed about everything.
Honestly, this has probably been the most remarkable hour in this podcast. It's certainly the longest podcast I've ever done, but it's
oh wait though, because I'm your 90th one, so I got you this candle to blow out for your 90th. Yeah. Oh wait. Happy 90th.
You're fired. I was going to go off now.
The sprinklers are going
to come on. The whole thing. You're going to evacuate the building now. But no, honestly, I think this is a remarkable episode. Honestly, I feel there's so much leadership gold in this. This is going to be one of the episodes I share with everybody going forward. I was like, why should I come on your podcast? And I'm like, this is why. This is they honestly seem like this was phenomenal. And I just want to say thank you very much for coming on.